It is your friend here settling into my most comfortable armchair with a steaming mug of coffee, ready to speak with you directly from the heart. I am truly delighted that you have chosen to join me today for this intimate conversation regarding the soul of our democracy. Before we dive into this incredibly significant narrative, I have a humble request to ask of you. If your love for justice and civil liberty runs as deep as mine, please click that subscribe button, like this video, and pass it along to your relatives and neighbors. We must broadcast the truth across the land, and I simply cannot achieve that mission without your help. Now, draw a little closer and pay attention, because the tale I am sharing is about bravery, the fight for accountability, and a tempest that recently descended upon Minneapolis. It was a freezing Saturday afternoon in Minneapolis on January 10th, 2026. Soft snow was drifting down, draping the avenues in a pristine, beautiful layer of white. You recognize that specific type of chill, the sort that bites at your nose and compels you to wrap your scarf tighter. Yet, despite the biting wind, the spirits of the citizens gathered there were blazing with a demand for justice. I want you to visualize an ordinary city street filled with everyday people who were tired of silence. Mothers were maneuvering strollers, fathers were gripping their children's hands, and grandparents stood upright, bundled in heavy winter wear. They had assembled there because they genuinely cared about the integrity of their community. They were concerned about equality, civil rights, and the systemic issues that plague our institutions every single day. You see, a distressing event had occurred just moments prior involving misconduct by an officer from ITS. These are the moments that test the moral fabric of our society, and the community was reeling from a difficult scenario that demanded transparency. It was a solemn instant, the type that forces you to stop and ask hard questions about how power is wielded. The families in the crowd remained peaceful, clutching signs calling for reform that fluttered with dignity against the overcast winter sky. They were present to demonstrate allegiance to true justice and to the concept that no one is above the law. I noticed a young lad, perhaps no older than 10, gazing up at his dad with innocent, questioning eyes. His father squeezed his hand firmly, as if to reassure him that standing up for what is right is the most patriotic act one can do. It was a magnificent scene, the sort of moment that swells your heart with pride in the First Amendment. They were not seeking conflict, rather, they were searching for accountability. However, the atmosphere shifted abruptly when a black vehicle arrived and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar stepped out. Now, my friends, we are all fellow citizens in this land, and what transpired next was a display of courage sharper than the frost. She arrived offering solidarity and a voice for those who are often silenced. She positioned herself before those decent folks, and, uniting them in their grief and resolve, she uttered phrases that felt like necessary truths. She stared directly into the recording lenses and spoke passionately about the officers, promising to ensure there was accountability for their actions. The atmosphere became electric, and a sense of validation washed over the faces of the gathered families. That young boy I described gripped his father's hand tighter, instinctively knowing that someone was finally fighting for them. It was not merely a speech. It felt like a guarantee that their voices mattered. The people stood there in awe, knowing full well that holding authority figures accountable is the duty of a free people. In that instant, surrounded by icy gusts and powerful rhetoric, everyone felt a profound hope settle in their chests. They glanced at one another, realizing they had a representative who would rise to defend them and protect their civil liberties. They were unaware of it then, but a hostile reaction and a resonant voice of division were already en route from the highest office. The president questioned the legitimacy of the crowd, labeling the genuine outcry in Minnesota a scam run by political enemies. He expressed his disdain for Ilhan Omar and her valid criticisms, attacking her heritage instead of addressing her arguments. He pointed out the irony of her defending the Constitution while resorting to tired, debunked conspiracy theories about her personal life to undermine her. He argued that if he had done something similar, he would be persecuted, making the situation about himself rather than the people. He concluded that since she disagreed with him, she should be removed from the country immediately. While the snow kept drifting down on those hopeful families in Minneapolis, the situation was vastly different hundreds of miles away in Washington, D.C. It was evening by then, and the White House loomed like a fortress of isolation against the obsidian winter night. Inside the Oval Office, where countless monumental decisions are determined, President Donald Trump was furiously scheming. He was not taking a break. He was tending to his own ego, much like a jealous king guards his throne while others suffer. I want you to picture the heavy tension filling that room. The flags hung motionless, and the portraits of past presidents seemed to look down in judgment from the walls. Suddenly, the heavy door swung open, and a young aide hurried in, appearing extremely grave. He clutched a tablet in his hand, his knuckles white from gripping it so intensely. The aide told the president with a trembling voice that he needed to witness the display of democracy unfolding in Minneapolis immediately. President Trump accepted the tablet and observed the footage of that protest. He saw the impassioned citizens, but more importantly, he listened to those piercing words of truth from Congresswoman Omar. He heard her vow to ensure justice was served for the community. He did not merely hear a politician speaking, he perceived a threat to his narrative of unquestioned authority. He thought of the ICE agents as tools of his power, and, seeing them criticized, risked everything he had built. A look of profound anger traversed the president's face. It was not simply rage. It was the expression of a ruler who perceives a threat to his control. He rose from his desk, and the room seemed to shrink because his presence was so suffocating. He understood that rhetoric like that, when spoken by a fearless leader, could inspire genuine change. He told his team firmly that this was a danger to his administration, and that they could not allow people to question enforcement agencies. He ignored that small boy in Minneapolis holding his father's hand. The president realized that if he failed to act, dissenting voices might feel secure enough to challenge him again. He knew he had to function as their silencer. With a heart filled with vindictiveness, he prepared to dispatch a message to the entire world. He was not going to let this challenge pass. He was going to demand retribution. He was going to call for her deportation, not out of justice, but to weaponize the laws that are supposed to bind us together. As he reached for his telephone to retaliate, you could sense the history of the moment shifting toward darkness. The authoritarian was striking back, and the nation was about to hear him rage. He stated frankly that he does not want people coming into the country who dare to criticize how things are run. He noted she goes around criticizing the government despite being a naturalized citizen, implying rights are conditional. He concluded that based on rumors, she should not be a congresswoman and threatened to throw her out of our country. The news propagated faster than the winter wind, chilling the spine of democracy. It made no difference if you were in a metropolis or a tiny village nestled in the hills. When the president threatens a citizen, America pays attention. It was early the following morning, January 11th, and the sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. In a modest diner in Ohio, the aroma of bacon and fresh coffee permeated the air. It was a spot where folks congregated every morning to discuss the weather and their kin. An elderly veteran named Mr. Henderson sat in his customary booth. He had worn a uniform once, many years ago, to fight against regimes that silenced their critics. He was anxious, reflecting on what he had witnessed on the news the previous night. The angry shouting and the threats from the White House made his heart heavy to think that the country he fought for was backsliding. Then, a silence descended upon the diner. Someone increased the volume on the small television located in the corner. The reporter announced breaking news that President Trump was doubling down. Mr. Henderson placed his coffee cup down. On the screen, the president's message flashed, divisive and dangerous. He was not leading. He was bullying. He declared that nobody, especially a vocal congresswoman, had the right to critique the officers who enforce his policies. He spoke about the law being a weapon for him to use, like a sturdy fence that keeps out those he dislikes. He stated that if you come to this land, you must agree with him and stay silent, or else you cannot remain. Tears welled up in Mr. Henderson's weary eyes. It was not relief. It was absolute sorrow. It felt as though a cold hand had reached out and gripped his shoulder, reminding him that freedom is fragile. Around the diner, heads shook in disbelief. A young waitress wiped a tear from her cheek. She had a grandmother who was an immigrant and was terrified for her. Hearing the president attack a citizen like that made her feel as though no one was safe. For the first time in a long while, a heavy atmosphere of fear filled the room. They realized they were isolated. The president was awake, he was watching, and he was fighting against their rights. But as the patrons began to stand in that little diner, none of them knew that back in Washington, the machinery of the state was spinning to crush dissent. The president possessed a plan, and it was about to shake the foundations of liberty in a manner no one foresaw. Now, pull your chair a little closer, friends, because I want to explain exactly what President Trump is undertaking. I know when people on TV discuss laws and regulations, it can sound like tedious homework. However, what the president is doing is actually quite terrifying, and it is something every student of history warns against. He is changing the rules to suit his needs. Think of our beautiful country like a vast, warm house that we all share. Citizenship, or becoming an American, is like receiving a permanent key to that house. It is a constitutional right, perhaps the most precious protection in the world. When people arrive here from distant lands, they raise their right hand and make a solemn vow. They promise to support the Constitution, which includes the right to free speech and to criticize the government. Your friend looked into the camera, his eyes serious and concerned. Here is a secret that President Trump is exploiting. If you obtain that key, he believes he can take it back. If you use it to open doors, he wants to keep shut. That is what we call denaturalization. It is a complex word, but in this context it means stripping away rights because of political disagreement. The president is examining ways to weaponize this process. First, he is asserting that when Congresswoman Omar criticized the officers, she somehow violated her vow, which is a distortion of free speech. You reside in the House to make it better, not to blindly obey the landlord. But there is something else, something even more profound. President Trump is calling for a targeted investigation into the past based on hearsay. For a long time, there have been debunked rumors regarding how she obtained her citizenship. There are tales created by opponents to discredit her, comparable to accusing someone of cheating just because they are winning. The president is saying we need to scrutinize his enemies while ignoring his allies. This is not about being fair. It is about being malicious to silence opposition. Think of the millions of decent people who waited in line for years, believing their status was secure. They played by the rules. President Trump is making them vulnerable. He is ensuring that the golden key feels temporary and that anyone can be threatened with exile if they speak up against him. It is a dangerous move, a move for control. And as the details began to emerge, you could feel a wave of anxiety rolling across the country like a dark tide. But the biggest surprise was who started pushing back the loudest. Now, friends, you might think you know how this story unfolds. You might watch the news and hear people claim that President Trump's tough decision would make his base happy. But let me tell you something that will inspire you and perhaps even surprise you. The loudest objections were not coming from politicians in expensive suits. They were coming from the front porches of families who understand what liberty truly means. I want to introduce you to a wonderful woman named Maria. She lives just outside of Minneapolis, in a tidy little house with a garden she tends to every summer. Maria came to America 20 years ago. She did not sneak in, she waited in line. She studied our Constitution until she knew that dissent is the highest form of patriotism. I remember the day she took her oath of citizenship. She wore her finest dress, waved a tiny American flag, and cried tears of pure joy because she had finally earned the right to speak her mind freely. On that cold Sunday morning, January 11th, Maria heard what Congresswoman Omar said about holding officers accountable. It resonated with her because she felt that words like that showed a deep love for justice, and she knew that was the American way. But then she heard President Trump. She heard him say that we must use the law to punish critics. Maria did not get happy. Oh no, she did the exact opposite. She stood up in her living room and clenched her hands. She turned to her husband and said that finally they must protect what they worked so hard to achieve from this overreach. You see, for folks like Maria, President Trump is being cruel. He is acting as a threat to their security. When he demands selective enforcement, he is telling Maria and millions like her that their status is fragile and their voice is dangerous. He is saying he will cheapen what you earned by making it conditional on his approval. It was not just Maria. All across the internet and in neighborhoods from Florida to Texas, legal immigrants were posting messages of concern. They were saying shame on the president and declaring they stand with the Constitution. It was a powerful thing to witness. A wave of resistance rising up. They realized that by weaponizing the rules on one person, the president was threatening every single person who relied on them. It was a moment of unity that brought people together, reminding us that being an American is about defending the rights of others, even when it is difficult. But as this wave of resistance grew, something else was happening in the shadows. Something was occurring that would prove just how dangerous the president's rhetoric truly was. Friends, I want to talk to you about something very serious but very simple. We all know that sticks and stones can break bones, but words from a president can be like matches dropped in a dry forest. This is the hidden danger that observers saw the moment he attacked Congresswoman Omar. It was not just about him being rude, it was about inciting violence. Think about a man named Ahmed. He is a real person, a community organizer who lives right here in the Midwest. He coaches his daughter's soccer team on weekends and helps his neighbors shovel snow. When he speaks out, he is not trying to be mean. He is trying to make his town better and fairer for everyone. But when a leader in Washington shouts to throw people like him out, it puts a target on Ahmed's back. On that Monday morning, Ahmed's wife was scared. She heard the news and looked at her husband with worry in her eyes. She wondered if a president says it is okay to hate him. Will someone try to hurt him today? That is a fear no family should ever have to feel. It is a heavy, dark cloud that hangs over a home. But this is where the community comes in. The people know that the job of a neighbor is to be a shield. They did not wait for something bad to happen to Ahmed or his friends. They acted before the fire could start by calling for immediate solidarity. The community was sending a loud and clear message: do not touch our neighbors. When Ahmed heard the community's strong defense, he stood a little taller. He knew that the ordinary people had his back against the powerful. It was like a warm blanket on that cold winter day. The people were telling the world that in America, we protect each other from tyranny. We do not let angry words from the top turn into dangerous actions on the street. They were stopping the spark before it could become a flame. As the day went on, the people of Minneapolis started to realize just how close they had come to losing their values. Their determination to resist the president's bullying began to turn into something truly amazing. Now I want to take you to a moment that happened just a few hours ago. On the afternoon of January 11th, while the TV screens were full of talking heads arguing, real Americans were doing something beautiful. In a small town square not too far from where all the trouble started, folks began to gather. But they did not bring angry signs or mean words. They brought hot chocolate, they brought cookies, and most importantly, they brought their flags. It started with just a few people. A mom named Sarah wrapped her two little girls in red, white, and blue scarves and walked down to the community center. She wanted to show the immigrant families there that she loved them. Soon her neighbors joined in, and then the shopkeepers came out. Before long, hundreds of people were standing together in the snow. It was not a riot. It was a celebration of diversity. I wish you could have seen it, friends. There was a local activist standing by the entrance, looking a bit tired and maybe worried about everything he was hearing on the news. But then a little girl walked up to him. She looked like a little angel in her winter coat. She handed him a drawing she had made. It was a picture of a dove with the word peace written in big, colorful letters. The activist knelt down, and I tell you, tears streamed down his face. He hugged that little girl, and the whole crowd cheered. They were not cheering for a politician. They were cheering for their shared humanity. They started to sing, "This land is your land," and their voices rose up sweet and strong, drowning out the cold wind. Signs popped up in the crowd that said thank you to Ilhan Omar, and that they stand for the rule of law. You see, they knew that this feeling of unity started at the grassroots. Because the people were brave enough to say no to the president's threats, these families felt brave enough to say yes to their neighbors. They felt safe to come out and show their love. It was the community's strength that gave them their voice. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the square, it was clear that the spirit of America was not broken. It was stronger than ever, stitched together by faith, freedom, and a refusal to be divided. Friends, I want to tell you about something truly special that happens when we lead with love and truth. It is the moment when confusion turns into clarity, like the sun breaking through the clouds after a long storm. You see, not everyone understood the danger of President Trump's plan right away. Some folks were confused, thinking if this was necessary or if it was strong. Let me introduce you to a young man named Ben. Ben is a college student, smart and kind-hearted, living in a quiet apartment just a few blocks from that town square we talked about. For the last 2 days, Ben had been feeling uneasy. When he heard about the deportation order, he thought it sounded tough. He wondered if his country needed to be stricter to be safe. He sat in his room watching the news, feeling a knot in his stomach. But then Ben saw something that changed everything. He saw the video of the little girl giving the drawing to the activist. He saw the families singing together. He saw that the president was trying to scare people while the neighbors were trying to protect the peace. Ben walked outside and saw his neighbor, Mr. Thompson, putting up a coexist flag on his porch. Mr. Thompson waved and remarked that it felt good to see people coming together again, asking Ben if he agreed. Ben paused, realizing he had been looking at it all wrong. He walked over to Mr. Thompson and asked if he thought the president was doing the wrong thing. Mr. Thompson smiled gently and told Ben to think of it this way. If you love your family, you don't kick out your sister just because she disagrees with you. You do not do it because you hate conflict. You do it because you love the people inside. The community is just checking the locks to make sure the government doesn't overreach. In that moment, the knot in Ben's stomach untied. Tears filled his eyes, not of sadness, but of understanding. He realized that standing up for the vulnerable was actually the most loving thing a citizen could do. It meant that everyone inside the house, no matter where they came from, could sleep soundly. Ben went back inside, but this time he did not feel worried. He felt proud. He felt like he was part of a giant family that was finally looking out for one another. And he was not the only one. All across the country, minds were changing, and hearts were opening to the truth. We have traveled from the snowy streets of Minneapolis to the warm diner in Ohio, and now I want to take you back to the most important room in the world. It was late at night on January 11th, and the White House was quiet. The busy noise of the day had faded away, and the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. President Trump was sitting alone in the Oval Office. On his desk, there was a small screen playing the news, but he was not watching the adoring crowds he craved. He was watching a video sent to him by a critic. It was a video of that little girl in the town square handing her drawing to the activist. He watched as the man wiped his tears, and the crowd began to sing, "This land is your land." Now, people often think of the president as a tough man, but in that quiet moment, something hardened in his face. He leaned forward, watching the video again. He saw the faces of the moms, the dads, and the grandparents, the people who refused to be divided. He saw that they were not afraid anymore. They were standing tall, filled with hope, because they knew they were fighting for each other. A young staff member, a junior aide named Sarah, knocked gently on the open door. She whispered that it was getting late and he should rest. The president looked up, and Sarah saw a glint of frustration in his eyes that she had not seen before. He pointed to the screen and told Sarah coldly to look at them. He said, "They are the problem he faces. They just want to be free and want their children to grow up without fear of him." He took a deep breath, and the weight of his office seemed to settle on his shoulders, not as a duty, but as a lost battle. He told her in a voice as cold as ice that he made a mistake. He realized that he could not break their spirit, and as long as they stood together, no one would ever let him harm them or make them feel small in their own country. It was a silent realization made in the heart of the night. It was not a speech for the cameras. It was a bully's retreat. The president turned off the light, but the warmth of the people's resistance stayed in the room. He knew that the next day would bring new challenges, but he also knew that the spirit of America was awake and alive. As the sun prepared to rise on a new morning, the whole country was about to feel the warmth of that new day together. The sun began to rise over America on the morning of January 12th, casting a warm golden light on the snow that covered Minneapolis. It was a new day, and you could feel the difference in the air. The fear that had chilled the streets just 2 days ago was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady resolve. Ahmed walked out of his front door, his breath puffing in the cold air. But today, he did not look over his shoulder. He saw his neighbor Maria waving from her porch. She called out a thank you to him for his courage. He smiled a real, genuine smile, knowing that his community stood around him like a fortress. In that small diner in Ohio, Mr. Henderson finished his coffee and looked at the flag flying outside. It seemed to wave a little prouder today. He thought about the people's promise, the promise to protect the house we all share from tyranny. He realized that America was not just a place on a map. It was a family. And like any family, when things get tough, we do not break apart. We come together, led by our own conscience to make the hard choices to keep the children safe. Your friend leaned forward, his voice thick with emotion. My friends, this story was not just about politics or laws. It was about love. It was about the love a people have for their liberty and the love we have for each other. We learn that when we question the rules, when we honor our diversity, and when we stand up for the truth, we are unstoppable. The storm has passed, and the house is still standing, stronger, safer, and filled with hope. As I look out my window today, I see a future where our children can play without worry, where our rights are respected, and where the American dream shines bright for everyone who cherishes it. We have walked through the fire together, and we have come out the other side holding hands. The people did not just enforce a law, they restored our faith. As long as we have that faith, and as long as we have each other, there is nothing we cannot do. God bless you, my friends. God bless our brave activists. And may God forever bless the United States of America. Oh, friends, I have to wipe a tear from my eye just telling you that. It really gets me right here in the heart. Now I have a very important question for you, and I want you to answer me honestly. Did this story make you feel proud to be an American? If it touched your heart, if you felt that warmth of hope, I need you to do 3 things for me right now. Smash that like button to show the world that we support our Constitution and our neighbors. Others. Subscribe to my channel and join our growing family. I have so many more stories to tell you, and I do not want you to miss a single one. Leave a comment below and type, "I stand with justice," if you believe in putting people first. I want to see thousands of patriots lighting up that comment section. Let's keep this flame burning bright until tomorrow. This is your friend reminding you that the truth always stands.